But we begin with Richard Schweiker. He started out life as an executive at his family's tile company and wound up as a Republican senator from Pennsylvania. When he died in 2015, the New York Times eulogized him like he was some kind of political uniform, calling Schweiker, quote, an enigmatic Republican who looked conservative to many liberals and liberal to many conservatives. And in part, he earned that reputation because during Watergate, he was an outspoken critic of President Nixon. In 1974, Schweiker became the third Republican senator to call for Nixon to resign, saying, quote, I cannot remain silent in the face of a now obvious moral corrosion destroying and debasing the presidency. That was in 1974. 2 years later, in 1976, this happened.
I am proud to accept Governor Reagan's invitation to be his vice presidential running mate. This bold, unprecedented action dramatizes the leadership, the courage, and the openness which Governor Reagan will bring to the White House. Governor Reagan's decisive stroke, in one fell swoop, unites the Republican Party for November by bringing together the conservative and moderate wings of our party. It instantly gives our party across-the-board appeal. This exciting action spells victory in November, but more importantly, it spells government that is responsible and responsive to all people.
This exciting action spells victory in November, or not. If Reagan was hoping to get everybody's attention by choosing the former tile company executive to be his running mate 3 weeks before the convention, well, that worked. The New York Times called it, quote, a total surprise. Reagan chooses Gass, a liberal, for his running mate. So it definitely earned Reagan some headlines. It did not, however, earn Reagan much more than that.
West Virginia.
20 votes for Gerald R. Ford.
That did it. Gerald Ford was over the top.
Reagan lost to Gerald Ford, and then Ford lost to Jimmy Carter, which you'd think might make other would-be presidential candidates think twice about the whole pick a Veep out of the gate strategy. But that did not stop Texas Senator Ted Cruz from dusting off the Reagan playbook and giving it another shot. In 2016, when he tried to energize his campaign and peel off voters who wanted a woman on the ticket by declaring one-time rival and former Hewlett-Packard CEO Carly Fiorina as his running mate. We know how that turned out for Senator Cruz, and we know how it worked out for Carly Fiorina.
Help me welcome your next first family, Heidi Cruz, your next first lady, Carolyn and Catherine, and the next president of the United States, Ted Cruz.
He just kept shaking everybody's hand. Okay, so this grand gesture by Ted Cruz, it backfired. But you can see what he was going for, the same thing Reagan was going for, making an early vice presidential pick to secure more voters than you might have been able to do on your own. And we're already seeing hints of that in the 2020 race, a reboot of the Reagan-Schweiker gambit. But this one actually might just work. We saw it when Senator Cory Booker sat down with Rachel right here at this very desk. When asked if he would commit to putting a woman on the ticket as his running mate, Senator Booker said he would, quote, be looking at women first. Shortly after announcing that he was in, Beto O'Rourke said that if he wins the nomination, he also would pick a woman as his running mate. So this is now a thing, right? But now move over, Booker and Beto. Biden may be about to do you one better. Axios is reporting that, quote, close advisors to Joe Biden are debating the idea of packaging his presidential campaign announcement with a pledge to choose Stacey Abrams as his vice president. Stacey Abrams, of course, has the wind at her back, having narrowly lost her bid for governor of Georgia and then becoming the first African-American woman to deliver the State of the Union response. The Stacey Abrams it factor is so high right now that 10 days ago, when she tweeted that 2020 is definitely on the table, she nearly broke the internet. So the possibility that 2020 is on the table for Stacey Abrams, perhaps as a part of a Biden-Abrams ticket, has made some waves. And so far, Abrams is not denying it. Far from it. A spokesman for Stacey Abrams said that, quote, she continues to keep all the options on the table for 2020 and beyond. And that's not the only unconventional strategy that Biden is reportedly considering. The New York Times reports that he's also considering pledging to serve only one term. Quote, framing Mr. Biden's 2020 campaign as a one-time rescue mission for a beleaguered country. the Abrams strategy and the one-term pledge, both in effort to tamp down concerns about electing a 78-year-old president next year. The Times notes that Biden and Abrams had lunch in Washington last week, and both declined to say if he had broached the subject of the vice presidency. So read into that non-denial, denial, whatever you will. But here's something that's less up for interpretation. 76 and 45, the respective ages of former Vice President Joe Biden and Stacey Abrams. That's a 31-year spread. Hard to argue that that wouldn't make a Biden-Abrams ticket appealing to a younger audience, and one looking past 2020 to the future. Joining me now is Karine Jean-Pierre, a senior advisor to MoveOn.org. Karine, great to see you as always.
Hey, Joy, great to see you as well.
All right, let's go through this Biden gambit, because there are two ways to interpret it, right? One would be he so badly wants to be president that he wants to have Stacey Abrams as sort of like the human like dangle to say, look, if you let me have this thing I want, you can have her as my apprentice, as my number two. Or that he sees himself as a stabilizing figure, but he recognizes people might be concerned with his age, and so he wants to have somebody waiting in the wings to be vice president. Are either of those things striking you as more true, and do you think that this gambit might work?
Yeah, so I want to add just one more thing, Joy. Can you imagine 4 years ago that we would be having this conversation, that we would be talking about Stacey Abrams, a black woman who graduated from Spelman, a Spelman alum, who is being seriously considered for a VP pick, and she should be on everybody's list, period. Like, she should be on that short list for everyone that has now already announced it's in the race. And also the diversity of this primary. We have Kamala Harris, who is an alum of Howard University, who's in the top tier. I mean, that is pretty phenomenal. And we would never be having this conversation 4 years ago. Look, with the two examples that you gave me, I think I'll add one more to that, which is I do think that there is, from Biden, he feels as if, look, if I'm going to jump in, and he understands he's going to be 78 years old if he were to get the nomination in 2020, that he wants to show, look, I am like just handing over the party or bringing with me the younger generation of the party as well. Like, he's realizing that, look, I know where the party is going. It's getting younger, and black women are a big part of it. I mean, since 2016, as we saw across the country, that black women came out in record numbers. So I think there's a little bit of that as well. Now, if this is going to work, I do not know. Voters are going to ultimately decide. Is it actually going to happen? Also, I do not know. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be up to Stacey Abrams. If this conversation really happened, she's not a shrinking violet. Like, Stacey Abrams is incredibly smart. She has a plan for everything. She said herself, as you mentioned in the intro, that she has 2020 on the table. And so she has the power right now. She's a rising star, and I am ecstatic that she's being considered at all.
Right, but she's also considering maybe running herself, right?
Exactly.
So there is also the line of argument that why should she consider being number two when she could just be number one?
Yeah, and that's a great argument, too, because, look, we are so excited, or people were excited about Beto. Beto, is he going to run? When is he going to run? How is he going to launch his campaign? Why are we not having that conversation about Stacey Abrams? She ran an impressive race in a deep red state, Georgia, and outperformed everybody else who was a Democratic nominee for the gubernatorial seat before her. And I think she should, if she wants to run, she should definitely do it. And why not have the number one seat instead of number two? But that's also up to her, and she said she would decide by April. So I think that's also a very good argument, and I think there is a little bit of a double standard there, because we're talking about Beto, but how about Stacey Abrams?
Yeah, and speaking of Beto, I mean, one of the things that has been so impressive has obviously been his fundraising. Fundraised Bernie Sanders, who had been sort of the leader in terms of the fundraising haul. He raised over $6 million. Biden reportedly has expressed some concern that he might not be able to raise those kind of online donations in the same way. Adding Stacey Abrams would likely really fix that, right?
Absolutely. I think adding Stacey Abrams would add an energy that would give a boost to his launch. We've been judging a lot of these folks, not just by the money, but the launch. How are they launching the campaign? What are they doing? What's the inspiration? What's the message? And it would be all connected. Clearly, the money is important, because what it does is when you see these small dollar donations, this grassroots donation, it shows there is a movement for your campaign. Yeah. And those are people that you can go back to over and over again. And so Biden has never really done that before. Let's not forget the last time he ran alone was 12 years ago. He was supposed to raise $20 million. He raised about $11 million. And so he didn't reach the number that he needed to at that time, and he dropped out right after the Iowa caucus. So yeah, this is a different scenario for him that he's never experienced. And yes, a Stacey Abrams would add that energy for sure.
And lastly, would she kind of be the human interlocutor, the same way that he was for Barack Obama, to say to white working class voters he's okay? Would she serve that same sort of function for him, because he does have some issues in terms of his past views on busing, things about Anita Hill, stuff that's going to come up?
Yeah, I was thinking about that one. I don't think Stacey Abrams is a buffer for all of the other issues that he's going to have to deal with his record on the crime bill, on Anita Hill. I think it doesn't take away from that. I think he has to seriously come out, and when he runs, whether it's with a VP ticket or not, he really has to say, hey, let me address these issues of my past, my record on things that I've said. That's not going to go away. And I don't think that, like I said, she's a buffer for that.
Yeah. Karine Jean-Pierre, senior advisor to MoveOn.org. Always so smart. Thank you very much. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Joy.
All right.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.